First, let me tell you a little bit about the book Fame by Daniel Kehlmann, and then I'll tell you about the mixed feelings I ricocheted among as I made my way through this book. It is subtitled A Novel in 9 Episodes, and it comes to us via Kehlmann, who is a internationally best-selling author from Germany. He's written numerous books, but it's his last one, Measuring the World, that sold 1.5 million copies and skyrocketed this 30-something writer into high literary fame. This book, I believe, is his third translated into English, and it comes to us via Pantheon from Carol Brown Janeway, the translator. It is, as you might suspect from the subtitle, constructed via what might otherwise be called short stories. We move among different characters, different places, different times, and different formats for storytelling, all circling around the core concept of fame, notoriety, persona, identity, alienation, and the commodification of personality. The stories are also connected in a sort of metafictional way in that they speak to each other. The characters and consequences and events of one story will reappear in another. For example, the opening story features a character who suddenly starts receiving phone calls on his cell that are directed towards someone who is not him. And this someone who's not him happens to be a very famous movie star. After a while of simply being irritated and confounded by what seems to be a technological mix-up, he starts playing along. He starts playing the character. He starts making dates with the women who calls him and then standing them up and playing with this idea of being someone else. In later stories, we come across some of the other sides of what happened and what the consequences were of this behavior. The other key connector in the story is they continually circle around many kinds of literary celebrities. There's the neurotic character Leo Richter, a writer who one can't help but suspect is a satirization of Kehlmann himself in the wake of his literary fame. Not only does he show up in several of the stories, but also one of the stories that is ostensibly written by him stands alone as an episode. So we have a lot going on in this slim little book. And here are some of the mixed feelings I was moving along. On one hand, there is delight. It's fun to see this playfulness appear on the page. It's fun to find these kinds of connections. It's fun to move to the next episode and not know where I'm going to be guided next, but understanding that some of what I've read before is going to be pushing into it. There is humor and a light touch brought to a lot of the events of this. There is a fearlessness with absurdity, and there also is a really bright light shed on different forms of celebrity instead of just our obvious movie stars and even literary celebrities, which might be a little less obvious, but there's also the fame that comes from one character who is a serious full-time commenter on internet forums. One of that stories stands alone as an entire long post of his on some kind of celebrity sighting site. And I really appreciated how technology saturates this book, and even though I suspect it'll date it at some point, but it's fun. It's fun to move around among these different kinds of storytelling, and I appreciated the acknowledgement of all these different kinds of notoriety and personas that we create, and that highlighting of that tension between public personality and private identity. The machinations of what we present to the world is laid bare, and the reader and writer themselves do not escape it. There's a lot of points in the book where there's a explicit acknowledgement of these stories being stories, or this novel as a novel. Speaking of novels, I also thought that the book plays with the idea of a novel as a novelty, and for that it was fun and interesting and engaging, and I enjoyed it. Now here's the other side that I think a lot of other reviewers are putting forth, and that I struggled with myself. When an author is clever in a book, he's often suspected of being merely clever, that we are simply to be awed before writerly fireworks and tricks that are interesting but ultimately empty ways of storytelling. And there's a sense of it being hollow in content and instead all show on the surface. And I did feel a little bit of that. A lot of what he's talking about here, these questions about fame and celebrity and all this stuff and its dark side and all that, they're not really new. A lot of people have been tackling this in in different forms for centuries. And what is unique about what he's doing is mainly simply that overlay of technology and just connecting it to our precise moment in time, which is clever in a lot of its the ways it's carried out. But what is it really bringing that is new? Ironically enough, what is it bringing that it's new, and what is the real substance that's here? I I don't know. I feel like that's he's rather evasive on that point, and that I struggled a little bit with that. I feel like what does give it worth and what does keep it from being you know, a mere writerly trick that he's put here. It may perhaps some sort of, meta comment on the literary celebrity he has now and you know, a little more beyond that. What saves it is that it does edge around substance. I don't mean that to sound backhanded, but for example, Leo Richter, our writerly character, is dating somebody who's involved with Doctors Without Borders, and more than just being a fact attached to this character's biography, the weight of what she's really struggling with, and that fear for people, and that real presence of danger in the world, that substance and tension and ferocity of what it means to try to help people in true crisis emergency situations, that's evoked very powerfully here, and it's contrasted sharply with a lot of that circularity of our modern fame. There's another story, which is probably my favorite episode of the novel, where Maria Rubinstein, who's a well-known crime writer, takes the place of Leo Richter and goes to some nation in the East, I believe it's unnamed, for some kind of tour for writers. An experience ends up devolving for her into this sort of Kafkaesque horror show, where she has no pathway back to normal life. I feel like that was a case where the fiction here surpassed cleverness and really evoked a lot of the terror that's underlying the world we create via fame, the fear and anxiety and stakes, the really high stakes that exist in the real world, are put up against that show that the characters, that our primary characters, are circling among, and that the novel itself is circling around. So those points of substance buoy the novel and keep it from being I don't want to call it merely fun, because I think fun matters and is a worthy end within itself, but it gives it a little bit more weight.